Great, and thank you, Alejandra, for your support in this webinar and all of the webinars that we offer here at Region 9. Good morning and welcome to the association, to our webinar series. Our goal today is to bring you up-to-date information from leading sources within the region. And today I'm joined by a great friend to Head Start, a national leader in pediatrics from Los Angeles and the Keck School of Medicine at the University of Southern California, Dr. Colleen Kraft. Dr. Kraft is the past president of the American Academy of Pediatrics. She's currently a professor of pediatrics, and her background and work includes pediatric care, pediatric education, and healthcare financing. Dr. Kraft is best known for her advocacy for humane treatment of migrant children at the U.S.-Mexico border. Her explanation to the public regarding the harm to young children during the zero tolerance policy that included the separation of children from parents at the border helped to mobilize advocates across the political spectrum to address this policy. She continues to advocate for the basic rights for children throughout the world. Be sure to use the features within Zoom to post your questions. There's a Q&A feature that we've left live that Dr. Kraft and I will both be able to see, and there's also a chat function. So please use those to pose questions, and we'll try to make sure that we address each of those as we go through the presentation this morning, or certainly at the end, maybe Dr. Kraft and I can pause for a couple minutes, check the chat, make sure that we equip you with the information that you need. Here at Region 9, we know that you are trusted messengers to our most important commodity, and that's the families that really work every day to guide and aspire for the best for their children. So we want to ensure you have the knowledge to support the families that you serve, that you care so greatly about. Dr. Kraft, what a pleasure it is to have you with us this morning. And of course, first, I want to thank Kim Stice from Newark for putting us together. A trusted colleague for years, I know of yours through the National Health Center, and of course, individual who we really work well with, their organization. So thanks to Kim for connecting us, and thanks to the time that you're going to be spending to educate us and the members that we serve here in Region 9. Good morning.
Well, good morning, and thank you for that kind introduction. As I pull my presentation up, I will mention that there was one piece of my bio that you didn't mention that I think is so important, and that is the fact that I was in the very first Head Start class in 1965. I was a child in Head Start, and it was what was really significant, and I think what your group really needs to know is that it was a teacher who told me that I was smart enough that I could be a doctor when I grew up. And that made the difference. I mean, that was something that that I thought, well, I have to be a doctor. So, what you say to your children and what you do with your children in your work really matters for them, for their future. And thank you for everything that you do. And we're going to talk about COVID-19 vaccine for kids ages 6 months to 5 years. So the way that I'm going to be looking at this and the topics that I'm going to be discussing is, first of all, why is COVID-19 something we even talk about with young children? Because there are a lot of myths about, well, they just get a little bit of a cold, they're not really all that sick with it. What's the impact on young kids? Then we're going to move on to COVID-19 vaccines and what are the vaccines for your 6-month-olds to 5-year-olds? We're going to talk about vaccine myths, plenty of them out there, and vaccine facts, plenty of those out there. We're going to talk about 5 things that parents need to know about the COVID-19 vaccines. We're going to talk a little bit about MISC, myocarditis, pericarditis. What is it that we're hearing about heart inflammation with the vaccines? And then we're going to finish up with frequently asked questions, and then we'll open the floor to questions from the group here. So let's talk about the impact of COVID-19 on young children. Right now, kids make up a little bit under 20% of all COVID-19 cases, but we've had a total of 7.6 million children under 5 with COVID-19, and that the overall rate for children is 12,000 plus per 100,000 kids. With the new strains of COVID-19, including Omicron, the cases are not slowing down. Although children are getting less sick with COVID-19 than what we saw in the beginning of 2020. At the end of January of 22, when we really had the surge, kids were about 20% of those cases. And over that 2-week period, we had a huge increase in that. And when we see surges, what we're seeing more and more now is that children are becoming a greater percentage of those people getting sick with COVID-19. There's been a great impact on children with COVID-19. And what we see is that physically, respiratory problems, cardiac problems, and this is something that we don't hear about. You hear about the cardiac side effects of the vaccine, but you are much more likely to have cardiac side effects from the virus. And much more frequently, there are bad outcomes with the cardiac side effects from the virus, much less so than with the vaccine. We have seen some neurodevelopmental side effects of COVID-19, and I've actually seen this in my clinic itself, where we've had a few kids who have developed psychiatric problems, major psychiatric problems after COVID-19 illness. And then we've seen some cognitive and physical fatigue with children as well, too. I think the greatest thing that we've seen from COVID-19 has been the family impact. So it's been the disruption from childcare. And if you're sick, you've got to get tested before you can come back to childcare or preschool or school or other activities. And I think the one thing that this whole country can agree on is the fact that COVID-19 has caused a great disruption in society. And what can we do to try to minimize that disruption? Well, the answer to that is vaccinate your population. The best way to combat these issues is to prevent a COVID-19 infection in every way possible. Most importantly, the vaccines. The vaccines can help children stay focused on what's important in their education, what's important in their cognitive and social development, and what's most important with their families and their social lives. So what about the vaccines? What do we know about the vaccines that are being used in the 6-month-olds to 5-year-olds? There are 2 of them that have been FDA qualified for this. The first is the Pfizer vaccine. So to know a little bit about who was studied with this, Pfizer enrolled 4,500 children in its clinical trials. For those ages 5 and under, 1,678 children received 2 doses 3 weeks apart. And initially, what they actually found in the Pfizer studies is that the 2 doses didn't give the antibody that they felt was going to be protective. But then they put a 3rd dose in 2 months after the 2nd dose and found that that antibody was protected. The vaccine was well tolerated, and there were no new safety issues signaled. The majority of the side effects were mild or moderate. Moderna has come into play, and you'll find a lot of places that have been giving the Pfizer vaccine to kids age 5 and older are actually using the Moderna vaccine for kids under 5. And this is the reason because of it. The company enrolled almost 12,000 kids ages 6 months to 12 years in the study, and 6,700, so way more under 6 years of age. All of the children received 2 doses of the vaccine 28 days apart. And the majority of the side effects were mild or moderate, and no new safety concerns were identified. So for the Pfizer vaccine, they didn't see that it was effective after 2 doses and needed a 3rd. With Moderna, they actually did find that it was effective after 2 doses, and they had more kids that they studied. And this is the reason that you'll see a lot of your sites that have been giving Pfizer for over 5 are giving Moderna for under 5. After the 3rd dose of Pfizer, children 5 and under elicited a strong immune response. That efficacy was more than 80% in preventing a symptomatic infection, which means an infection with fever, with cough, with runny nose. The immune response measured for children under 5 compared favorably to that of the 2 doses in the adolescent to young adult population, 16 to 25-year-olds. So again, their immunity was very much like the immunity of their older siblings or parents. The study did take place before Omicron was predominant. In Moderna, the vaccine was effective against symptomatic infection in children ages 6 months to 2 years, 37% 2 to 5 years. But in both age groups, the two-dose favored comparably to the immune response in the 18 to 25-year-olds after 2 doses. And those studies were conducted during the Omicron wave. So you got to see the effect of the Moderna vaccine during Omicron. So let's move over to 5 things that parents need to know. The most important thing is that the benefits of the vaccines far outweigh any potential risks. I'm going to say that again, because what I'm finding in practice is that parents are giving their kids their regular vaccines, but they're very worried about the COVID vaccine. It's important to know that the benefit of the COVID vaccines far outweigh any risks. And the CDC continues to recommend COVID-19 vaccination for anyone 6 months of age or older. So here's the 5 things that parents need to know. Number 1, you cannot get COVID-19 from the vaccine. Really important, and that's a big myth that's out there. Number 2, vaccines were made following FDA standards. Also very, very important, because we need to know that anything that is created and given to very young kids has a standard for safety and a standard for efficacy. Number 3, COVID-19 vaccines do protect your health. They protect the health of the children who are vaccinated. And more so, what we saw before these vaccines came out is that young children would get COVID-19 and then give it to their parents, who would get much sicker with this. So COVID-19 vaccines protect your health. U.S. Head Start teachers, really important again too, because now that the younger children can be vaccinated, they can protect your health too. Number 4, the vaccines are zero cost out of pocket. So really important to know this, because how do you get access to the vaccines? And is this something that you have to be able to afford? The answer is no. It should be available to you and your family and your child out of pocket. And then number 5, vaccinated kids may have fewer restrictions. So as we're seeing, as the world is beginning to open up again, there are a lot of places, including travel and restaurants and venues and museums and places that people get together, that are looking to see if you are vaccinated against COVID. Because if you're vaccinated, then you're allowed in. There's not the restriction. The same thing is happening for very young children. So vaccinated kids may have fewer restrictions. What are the side effects? These are some of the common COVID-19 vaccine side effects. So kids over 4 years, when this was studied, what they saw was primarily a little bit of pain, a little bit of swelling, sometimes some redness in the arm where the shot was given. Some children over 4 years of age had fever. Some had some tiredness or fatigue. A few had headache. A few had chills. A few had muscle or joint pain or swollen lymph nodes. What did we see under 3 years of age? Common side effects again included a little bit of pain where the shot was given, some swollen lymph nodes, some irritability or crying because of pain, sometimes a little bit of sleepiness, and sometimes a little bit of loss of appetite. So these are the common COVID-19 vaccine side effects. I'm going to mention a little bit about myocarditis, which is inflammation of the heart muscle itself, and pericarditis, which is inflammation of the outer lining of the heart. We have seen that these have rarely been reported, and primarily this has been reported in adolescents. So let's talk a little bit about the dose of vaccine. Adolescents age 12 years and older and adults got 30 micrograms of the antigen of the vaccine. Children ages 5 to 11 got 10 micrograms, so a third of what the adults and adolescents got. The children under 5 years of age are getting 3 micrograms, so they're getting a tenth of the dose of the adolescents even. And so what we saw with myocarditis in adolescents is we saw a small bump of people getting heart inflammation, particularly boys over 12 years of age. What's important to know is that that inflammation resolved entirely and there were no long-term side effects of this. What about the kids who didn't get the COVID-19 vaccine and got infected with COVID-19? They developed myocarditis or pericarditis from a COVID infection. And there were long-term effects, including heart failure, and several children that wound up having to have heart transplants because of the myocarditis that they got from the disease and not the vaccine. The idea of long COVID effects is long COVID heart failure or inability to get back to your level of fitness. And then something called multi-system inflammatory syndrome, which develops inflammation in many of your major organs in the body. Hospitalization and death did occur in kids getting COVID and not getting the vaccine. So let's talk about some really common myths. And these are some of the things that you have probably heard about, and you've probably heard your parents say, or you may have even heard your family members say and talk about. So one of the big myths is that the vaccine will cause infertility. And I heard this very, very early on here. What we know from millions of doses given and given it to women in fertility age is that the vaccines do not hurt fertility and they don't hurt the ability to become a parent for anyone. The second myth is that the COVID-19 vaccine is not really necessary because COVID-19 doesn't really make kids sick. Now, what we know is that most young children in that 6-month to 5-year range who got COVID-19 basically had a cold. Some of them had fever, some of them had a little bit of cough. Most of them, the vast majority of them, did not get super sick. And that's really true. But what we know is that COVID-19 can make children sick. We did have kids hospitalized. Back in January, about a quarter of the kids who were hospitalized for COVID-19 actually wound up in the intensive care unit. So they got very, very sick. It was primarily with respiratory infections and respiratory compromise and cardiac compromise. So COVID-19 can make kids sick. They should get the vaccine to protect themselves. A third myth is that the vaccines, which are mRNA vaccines, will affect your DNA and will totally alter your DNA going forward. That is a myth, and there's no truth to that at all. So the vaccines do not affect your DNA, do not affect your children's DNA, and don't affect the DNA of anyone. A fourth myth is that nobody is really protected if children get the COVID-19 vaccine. And that's wrong. And that, again, what we saw before the COVID-19 vaccines came out for the young children is that kids would get the illness, and many of those kids would not get very sick with this, but the adults would get really sick with it, or the adults would get it and they'd have to miss work, or they would have to miss other things going on in their lives. And then finally, if I don't vaccinate my child, it won't affect anybody else. It'll only affect my child. And that's also a myth, because the more kids who get vaccinated, the higher that idea of community immunity happens, and the less likely anybody is to be affected by COVID-19. So if you don't vaccinate your child, you are putting your child at risk, but you're putting everybody else's children at risk as well, too. So some other myths and facts. Some of what you hear is that the ingredients in the COVID-19 vaccines are dangerous. The fact is that nearly all the ingredients are also ingredients in many foods, fats and sugars and salts, things that we put into our body all the time. One of the myths, the natural immunity that I get from being sick with COVID-19 is better than the immunity I get from a COVID-19 infection or from vaccination. The fact is that getting a COVID-19 vaccination is a safer and more dependable way to build immunity to COVID-19 than getting sick with COVID-19. And I am thinking that many of you have had the experience that I have had in the office where you have seen somebody get sick with COVID-19 and 3 weeks later they get another infection. Again, the Omicron variant it does not make you quite as ill as the previous variants, but it's very contagious and people are getting it over and over again. The best way to become immune and the best way to prevent that recurrent infection is to get vaccinated. One of the myths is that COVID-19 vaccines cause the variants. This is in fact not true. What happens is that COVID-19 causes the variants because once they get into your body, they combine with cells and replicate, and that's where they mutate. And that's then where they transmit. So if you are immunized against COVID-19 and the vaccine gets to your body, you may not get sick, but you are far less likely of developing a variant and then transmitting that variant to someone somewhere else. So COVID-19s do not create or cause variants. The vaccine doesn't, the illness does. One of the other myths is that the mRNA vaccine is not really a vaccine. The fact is that the mRNA technology, which was developed decades ago and used in these vaccines, such as Pfizer and Moderna, work differently than other type of vaccines, but they still trigger an immune response inside your body. And that's the whole point of a vaccine, is that let's figure out how to trigger that immune response that your body produces so that when you're exposed to the virus, you don't get the virus and you don't get the illness that comes from the virus. One of the myths that we've heard about is that the COVID-19 vaccine contains microchips. That is entirely false. So the vaccine does not contain microchips. Vaccines are developed to fight against disease, and they're not administered to track your movement anywhere at all. Here's another one. Receiving a COVID-19 vaccine can make you magnetic. That is entirely false. It will not make you magnetic, including at the site of the vaccination, which is usually your arm. And these seem silly, but these are myths that are out there, and these are myths that I get asked about in practice all the time. So here's some other frequently asked questions. Should my child get the vaccine if they are immunocompromised and they have a pre-existing condition? And I get this with questions about asthma, questions about my child had leukemia and they're better. My child has rheumatoid arthritis. In fact, these are the kids that really need the vaccine because COVID-19 illness is going to be much worse in children who have an immunocompromised condition or a pre-existing condition. So the kids who really ought to be first in line are those kids with asthma, those kids who have had leukemia and they're better, those kids who have a cardiac disease. Get them vaccinated. The vaccine is far safer than getting the COVID-19 disease. Second, can you get other shots with the COVID vaccine, like the flu shot? Absolutely. We are now in our offices giving COVID-19 vaccine to our young children with their typical immunizations, with flu vaccine, with any other things that they are able to get in the office. Will my child have to have a booster shot? The answer to this is not known yet, although if we look at the experience of adults and adolescents and even the 5 to 11-year-olds now, it looks like immunity does wane with time, and very likely we will have to have booster shots, very much like the flu vaccine. Does my child need a vaccine if they aren't going to get very ill from COVID-19? Again, the answer to that is we should vaccinate all children. And the risk to younger children is that they tend to not get sick, but we have had kids who have been perfectly normal, perfectly fine, get very sick, wind up in the intensive care unit from COVID-19. We should protect them by vaccinating them. And if you've got a child, again, who's got a chronic condition, those are the kids that really ought to get immunized because COVID-19 is much more likely to get them very ill. Will my child get sick after getting the vaccine? Primarily what we have seen, particularly with the very young children, is a little pain at the shot site, sometimes a little bit of irritability. Generally within 24 hours, those side effects are gone. And again, those minor side effects really pale in comparison to the effects of COVID-19 on a young child. And even the disruption in having to stay home from school or preschool or Head Start. What are the different variants? We have seen in the last 2 years the Alpha variant, which was the original variant that got people very sick and contributed to a lot of deaths in this country, and the Delta variant, which was also quite virulent and got people very sick. Over 1 million people in the United States have died from COVID-19. That's more than any war. That's more than all the deaths from wars put together. It's greater than a lot of the deaths from many other infectious diseases as well, too. And then we also know that the Omicron variant, which is the primary variant, and there you'll hear different ones. You've got the BA2, the BA5. What we know about Omicron is that it's really, really contagious, but that people are not getting quite as sick with this. It doesn't mean you shouldn't vaccinate. It's still a better thing to vaccinate and be protected than to go and take the risk of getting the disease. How soon after testing positive can my child get vaccinated? Anytime. There is not a contraindication to vaccination if the child has had the disease. Again, it is best to try to get them protected and boost their antibody, which will actually help them out along with their natural immunity. Some other common frequently asked questions. It's summer and my kids are outside. Should I wait on the vaccine? I get this a lot, and parents will ask me, should I wait till we're closer to diseases and illness and wintertime? And the answer is no. We still are seeing Omicron. Let's get vaccinated and build those antibodies before the time of illness. Should I wait for a more specific Omicron variant vaccine? The answer is there's no need to wait. As vaccines are further developed, they will help to enhance immunity to the variants that are out there. But being protected is better than not being protected. What if my child has already had COVID-19? And will children need COVID boosters? If your child has already had COVID-19, any immunization will help to bolster their natural immunity that they have and prevent them from getting another infection. Again, we're seeing kids getting infections at the rate of 1 every month. So it's out there, and they can get infections even if they've had the disease. Children will likely down the road have COVID boosters. We're not seeing them right now, but just given the experience of the adults, we probably will see this down the line. And again, my child has special needs. Will they experience more side effects from the vaccine than other children? The answer is likely no. They will very likely have some similar vaccine side effects like pain at the shot site, maybe a little bit of fever, maybe a little bit of irritability, but they won't experience side effects from the vaccine greater than other children. However, they will experience illness at a greater rate than other children if they get COVID-19. So again, the vaccine is far safer than getting the disease, and it's worthwhile to get vaccinated and immunized. And now I'm at the point of the talk where I'm done with my formal presentation, and we will open it up to questions that we see in the chat or the Q&A. And I thank you for your attention, and I'm interested in answering questions that you have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Kraft. And I do see a couple of questions that we'll go to. I'm just curious, from listening and following the press, it does seem like as adults are experiencing less and less symptoms by having COVID, even after being boosted or vaccinated, that they tend to be less intense about their children getting vaccinated. There's sort of a comfort level with COVID-19 that's beginning to emerge. It's just something we have to live with.
Right.
Does that worry you as you monitor adults' choices for their children under the age of 5, applying those standards?
It does worry me because even though the variants that are out here right now are more contagious and less virulent, kids are still getting sick with them. We've gone to about 10% of our kids who are being admitted going into intensive care. But you don't know what that next variant is going to be like. And you don't know how virulent it's going to be. And the best way to protect your kids is to do that proactively and immunize them.
Absolutely. One question that popped up here is I've had a health practitioner that's recommended waiting 3 months after having COVID to get the COVID-19 booster. So I think this is referring to an adult.
Mhm.
What are your recommendations for this?
If you look at what the CDC recommends, they say that there is really no amount of time that you need to wait in between having COVID-19 and getting the booster. So if you are feeling well that day, you're over that initial infection, you should be able to go ahead and get the booster without any adverse effects.
And similarly, when should children get vaccinated after having COVID? So a child has had COVID, how long should they wait before they go in for their vaccination?
If your child is well, they can be vaccinated at any time. So I usually tell my families if they've got a checkup coming up, they can, or a visit coming up, they can be vaccinated in the context of that. So as long as they're feeling well after that COVID infection, they're okay to go ahead and get the vaccine.
Excellent. In the chat, there's a question from Araceli who asks, do you know why the CDC decided to remove the COVID exposure guidelines before the children under age 5 could get the chance to get fully vaccinated? Are you familiar with that?
Yes, I am. And I'm not sure why they did that because it is again, the CDC is really our guidelines and our standards, but a lot of times they're not particularly child focused. And so a lot of pediatricians did speak up when that initially came out because we need to do what we need to do to protect our kids. And before the vaccine was available, the best thing we could do was masking and social distancing. Now that we have vaccines, though, we've got another tool to protect our kids.
Excellent. And I don't see any questions in the Q&A, so I'll encourage folks to place their questions into the chat or in the Q&A. I'm curious from your perspective, having worked closely with Head Start, and my apology for skipping that in your
It's
bio.
okay.
It's a wonderful thing for you to add, and I certainly should have picked up on that. But as you think about our families and the worlds they navigate, the volume of medical information that they must navigate, sometimes in multiple languages and with maybe even limited health literacy because of access, what are the 3 takeaways that you would want our teams to be working on? What are the 3 things that are most mindful on this particular topic?
Okay. So I would say number one, COVID-19 is still very much a threat to our children and to our adults, our parents, and to you as Head Start staff. So, the children who are protected against COVID-19 are going to protect you as well as their families. So COVID-19 is very much a threat. Number 2, the vaccines are far more effective in protecting children and protecting you and protecting families than being open to getting the illness. So the vaccines are safe and the vaccines are effective, and we need to be using that technology in order to keep our children safe, to keep our teachers safe, and to keep their families safe. And then number 3, as we head into fall and winter, there's a lot of illness that disrupts preschool Head Start anyway. Let's do what we can to prevent that illness with our kids. So COVID-19 vaccines are safe and effective, a great tool in preventing illness. Flu vaccines are safe and effective, great in preventing illness. Other vaccines that your young children get are safe and effective, and again, will prevent illness with them, with you, and with their families.
I love the fact that you bring in that social impact in their slides, because clearly all of us have seen the absence of contact time in social groups. It's just such a loss of learning for both young children and all children in classrooms. So it's so important to keep them healthy and keep the attendance up so that they have contact time with teachers, their peers, and in their small communities for the benefit cognitive growth, for the benefit of social emotional growth and beyond.
Well, one of the topics that a lot of my preschool teachers ask me about is masking in young kids. Because there is something that you get from facial features and smiling and where a lot of development does happen through eye contact and just that social emotional interaction. I think that there's something that extra that you get from seeing a smile and actually hearing speech that's not muffled. And you can do that when everybody is protected. If you're less at risk of getting COVID from a child, then we can start to open up and we can start to do the things that are really developmentally important for young children.
Excellent. So true. That smiling face, that reassurance is such a valuable thing, and the vaccines do move us closer. And I will remind folks, the Office of Head Start is offering a webinar on this very topic, covering that and other aspects of COVID-19, August 29th. And so individuals who are on this call will have interest in signing up for that webinar. And if someone can throw that into the chat so others will be reminded of that, that would be great. I didn't grab that this morning. I'm just mindful of time. I see one more question here, and it says, I may have missed this, but if my child is under 5, gets COVID before receiving the third dose of the Pfizer vaccine, will they need to continue with getting the third dose as scheduled?
So the answer to that is yes. And the answer to that is, in fact, as you're building immunity, we know that less than the 3 doses is not optimum. So your child might get COVID during that time. As soon as they're feeling well, go ahead and get that third vaccine. Anything that's going to help bolster their immunity is only going to add to any natural immunity they get.
In the Q&A, it suggests that masking is out per the new CDC guidelines. However, for most states, it's in for Head Start masking. There are states such as the state of Arizona who have joined an injunction on masking of young children. So it's not mandatory in Alaska, but in the states that we serve, California, Hawaii, Nevada, masking for young children is in. But what is your thought per the new CDC guidelines about masking in classrooms?
I think that where they are trying to go to is that if we can get everybody protected, then masking may be optional. And again, the idea that everything that you can see on a teacher's face, especially with very young children, is going to help to promote their development. How do we keep our teachers and our kids safe from this virus and be able to do some of the developmentally positive things that you get from having just regular interaction without masks? And the answer to that is really going to be immunization. I think that there's going to be, in terms of masking, I think it should be optional for teachers. If teachers are feeling like they really feel much more protected by masking, that's going to keep happening. I know in my offices, we're going to continue to do that because it just is, it's just important to be able to stay safe and not be a vector of disease, even though we're all immunized as well too. So I think, again, though, the bottom line, though, is that the better protected our kids and our community is, the more likely we are to be able to kind of go back to life the way it was, which means without a mask.
There is a question here stating that both Pfizer and Moderna vaccines are out there for children. Which do you personally think is the better path to take?
I think they're both very good vaccines. I think that the advantage of Pfizer is that people in clinics have a lot of experience with Pfizer from their older children. The disadvantage of Pfizer is that you need a third dose, and it's always hard to get families in there to bring their kids in for the 3 doses. The advantage of Moderna is that it's only 2 doses. So you're seeing a lot of clinics who've used Pfizer for their 5 and ups going to Moderna for the 5 and unders, just because it's a little bit easier on the parents and families to get to full immunity.
And of course, I always want to ask resources. Of course, we have the CDC, and there's lots of other resources that roll out. What is your favorite site for our population who are messengers in this? And they may have their own feelings, but they're also trying to equip families. Where do you like to send folks for good, useful health literacy, health education?
So my favorite site is actually healthychildren.org, which is run by the American Academy of Pediatrics. Um, healthychildren.org is really a great resource for families and can explain things in ways that you can use to explain to your families and even sometimes to your kids.
Great. Good. Well, we'll include that in our notes and our wrap up. And there it is in the chat now.
Yeah.
So thank you,
Mhm.
Alejandra, for that. And of course, there were a couple requests for your PowerPoint. So if it's
I will
okay,
send that along to you. You're welcome to use it and share it. So yeah.
absolutely, we'll place it there. And then this says Alejandra said at the very beginning will be recorded or is being recorded and will be placed in our Vimeo channel for consumption just by those who show interest. We won't be putting it out beyond that, but your information, your time is so valuable to us. We want to be sure others get a chance to listen to this. And as always, encourage them to contact their local pediatricians. We know in California and Arizona, Nevada, there are active associations at the local level. Many of them participate in Head Start Health Advisory Councils, which we appreciate their commitments and their support of our families. And so it's always good to have these conversations, think through the strategies, maybe even have an open forum on this at a Head Start agency so that parents can ask those firsthand questions
Right.
and get comfortable with the information. So we want to encourage our programs to do all they can to position families to make the best decisions for their children, for themselves, and ultimately so that everyone, as you say, stays healthy and stays in
Yes.
class. Wonderful.
Okay.
Again, thanks for your time. Appreciate you and appreciate the work that all of you and your peers do to advance our knowledge of health, and appreciate everyone's attendance today. You'll be receiving a follow-up email from Region 9 Head Start Association with the links to this. It'll take generally about 48 hours for us to position it all, and then you're welcome to share that out with the programs, the folks that you work with. Have a great morning, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.